Hi, and welcome back to Wandering Wild. Today is Forgotten Friday, and instead of talking about a specific animal again, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process of creating the dinosaurs we know and love. So as you know, no one's ever seen a dinosaur, so how do we know what they look like? How do we get these pictures? How does everyone agree that a Tyrannosaurus Rex looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex? So that's what we're going to talk about today on Forgotten Friday. So let's get started. Okay, so when you see a picture, a drawing, or even a movie that involves dinosaurs, you're looking at a carefully imagined image, one of both the animal and the plants that were around during that time. Now, the question that we often have is, what's the scientific basis for this? How do we know that that's actually what the dinosaurs looked like? How do we know that some had feathers? How do we know that some were tall, stood upright, used only their back legs, or flew? These are all really good questions because we were never there, so we never saw it for ourselves. And all we have as proof is fossils and footprints and eggs and things of the like. So we don't even know what their skin looked like, let alone how do we know if they had feathers? Well, that's the trickiest part. So when we get a fossil, it can come in many shapes and forms. Often, it's not a complete skeleton. It's only a partial skeleton. And this can be due to the way that the animal died. If it was preyed upon by a predator, maybe it was scattered and not all the bones were left together. Or maybe it died in some sort of acidic part of the planet where the bones just didn't survive very well. Or even as erosion happened to kind of let the skeleton be seen and let it come to the surface, some of the bones were often damaged. So when we get a skeleton, it's very rare that it's complete and intact. However, over time, as we get multiple skeletons of the same species, we can kind of piece together an idea of what that animal's skeletal system looked like. Now, as far as feathers and skin type go, we know that these animals were reptiles, or maybe the place where their skeleton was found left an imprint in the substrate or the earth, and we can see the outlines and the forms of the feathers. These are the ways that we get kind of the information on the rest of the animal itself. Now, we know that if an animal lived in a desert climate, it's going to probably show some color characteristics. It's probably going to have some similar things that even our animals today have. So these are the things we use to kind of create that picture that you see in Jurassic Park or in your textbook, because overall we know that the animal, due to its skeletal structure, had to have this form. And then we know, based on where it lived and what animals it's similar to today, it probably looked similar to the picture you see. But a very specific process is followed by paleo artists. So these are artists for paleontologists, kind of. So basically, they recreate, they do the art surrounding fossilized Earth, so pieces of today's planet that used to be. They follow a process, and this process helps them to make sure that they're as scientific and as methodical as possible so that over time we don't make mistakes and we don't make assumptions that really can't be backed up. So one day we may find out that the Tyrannosaurus Rex was actually pink. I mean, it could happen. We really can't be sure. But more than likely it wasn't, because pink would really stand out in its environment. So I'm going to go through the step-by-step process that paleo artists use to compose some of these beautiful pictures that we see in our textbooks and these amazing films that we see, like Jurassic Park or dinosaurs or things of the like. Okay, so we're going to go through that process and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so the first step in this process really deals with the bones. So like I said, over time, once we have multiple specimens of one species, we kind of put together the skeletal structure. So we can really say, okay, this is all the bones that this animal probably had. Then we're going to put it in a posture. So how do we know that this dinosaur stood on 2 legs versus this dinosaur who stood on 4 or maybe swam? That's a little bit more difficult, and you're going to have to contribute gravity and size, and then the size and the shapes of the bones into that. And it's a very difficult process. Now, uncertainty comes into play with these when there's the fact that cartilage and things of the like are not fossilized, but they do contribute to the length, size, and stature of an animal. So knowing where cartilage goes in between discs. Now, we do know that skeletons just can't be held together in certain points without these things, and that postures can't be held without cartilage. So we use what we know about today's animals and what we know about the skeletal bones that we actually have for this animal, and we create this posture to where you really have one way that it all fits together. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, basically. So that's the first step, getting that skeleton, that skeletal structure that allows you to see the posture of the animal. Next, you add the muscle. Now, in order to determine where muscles go on an animal, we first had to really study the present day animals, because muscles, where they attach to bones, leave a scar. And this scar's size and shape and depth all helps determine how big these muscles were and the overall weight of the animal and the strain put on these muscles. So we use all of these things to determine where muscles go. And so scientists have to use the muscle scarring and the depth of that to determine how large these muscles were, where they should be placed, and what they probably did. And this again gives us more information that if an animal has 4 legs, but the back legs have really large, really strong muscles, and the front legs, like take the Tyrannosaurus Rex that we talked about last week, those front legs were so short with so little muscles that we really know he probably didn't walk around on those. We know that he used his back feet. And that's where these muscles come into play, and that's going to be your second step. Okay, so the last and final step is where we clothe the animal or the dinosaur. We give it its feathers, its skin, its armor if need be, and then finally its color. And so scientists use several different things to determine what animal should have what. The first thing they look at is skin impressions. Now, rarely do the sediments surrounding a fossil preserve an impression. It has to be just the right situation where the sediment around the fossil hardened very quickly and kept the impression of the skin or the feather that the dinosaur had. But when we do get that, we get texture. We find out if it was scaly, if it was big scales, little scales, whether or not it was just rough or smooth, or whether there were feathers or hairs even with things like woolly mammoth. And these impressions, even if they're only found on a couple specimens of one species, really help us to determine what that animal ultimately looked like on the outside. The next thing they looked at was armor. Now, some dinosaurs, like the ankylosaurs, had armor, and this armor was really unique to certain animals. But the osteoderms, which are the bone platelets that make up this armor, fossilize readily. So when these are found in association with a skeleton, we can really assume that they go together, and then we can look at the articulation and how they fit on the skeleton to determine how that armor was placed on an animal and how it protected it from predators. The third thing they looked for was feathers. So feathers are kind of tricky because they're rarely preserved with a specimen. Some specimens have been found in China and other places that show excellent representations of feathers that were on dinosaurs. Some dinosaurs were covered in just a thick coat of downy feathers. Some had long pinnate feathers on their arms and things, just like our common birds today. And then some fossils have what's called quill knobs in their bones, just like some of our birds do today. And basically this is where large feathers attach to the bone of an animal. And when you find these on a skeleton, you can really assume that this animal had feathers. And we use this to determine where feathers should be placed and how large they were based on the proper anchoring they needed and just the impression. So unlike a skin impression, you're also looking for feather impressions as well as feather anchors, basically. Now, the fourth and final thing that they look for and that they have to decide is the color of an animal. And like we discussed, that can be kind of tricky. Now, there was actually one fossilized skeleton found in China where there was the leftover remains from the feathers of the dinosaur that are called melanosomes. Now, just like the melanin in our skin, these melanosomes created the color in the feathers. And by taking these and kind of cross-referencing them and studying them, scientists were able to determine that this dinosaur had an orange and brown striped tail. Now, this is rarely the case, and usually scientists kind of have to use context clues to determine the color of an animal. What environment did it live in? What was it trying to hide from? What was it trying to hide in? Was it trying to hide? Did it think that it was venomous? Was it brightly colored like some of our poison dart frogs? These things are really the assumptions that we make about these animals because we never saw them, and the color of the skin is definitely not preserved unless you have these melanosomes, which we rarely find. But we can be pretty sure that T-Rexes were not hot pink. I hope you enjoyed learning all about how paleo artists create our dinosaur friends and bring the history to life. And as always, my sources are found in the description box below. If you like what you saw, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any more videos. And as always, stay wild and never stop wondering.